Hey, and welcome back. This is lecture number 5. Lecture number 5. In the previous lecture, we just went over some of the neuroscience on emotional intelligence. We talked about the brain circuitry. We covered the different brain areas or the different brain circuitry that are responsible for emotional intelligence, and we quickly covered the those 4 areas. So we talked about the amygdala, we mentioned the somatic sensory cortex, we talked about the orbital frontal lobe, and then we also talked about the anterior cingulate. In this particular lecture, we're going to go deeper into emotional intelligence. However, we're going to kind of remove ourselves from the science part of things and bring it down to a more practical way of looking at it. So in this particular lecture, we're going to be covering the 4 components of emotional intelligence. The first one of being self-awareness. The next one is emotional management. Third is going to be self-motivation. And then the fourth is relationship management. And you can even break these down a little further. So you can say self-awareness and emotional management are kind of personal abilities or personal skills, and then emotional management and relationship management are kind of interpersonal skills, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later on into the course. So when we're talking about self-awareness, research has been shown that there are actually particular brain areas that are associated with people who are high in self-awareness, and self-awareness is just us being cognitively aware of what's going on in our particular situation or in our lives at any given moment. So the neocortex is the top part of the brain. That's the cognitive part of the brain that deals with reasoning, it deals with logic and connecting things together. And then the bottom part of the more primitive part of the brain is the subcortex, and that includes things like the basal ganglia. And the basal ganglia actually has a connection to the the GI tract. So whenever we hear somebody say, "Oh, I have a gut feeling," that's actually the basal ganglia, and the basal ganglia has actually been said to have access to information that we aren't consciously aware of. And then also in the subcortex, the limbic system, which is again the primitive part, the thalamus, and then the hypothalamus. So there are 5 areas that we need to consider when we're talking about self-awareness. So the first one is life goals. You know, what are your life goals? What passions, what desires, what direction do you want to go in? We live in a culture today where a lot of us are kind of just going with the flow, and we cut on the news, or we hop on Facebook, or hop on Twitter, or hop on Instagram, and we're so hyped up and we're being driven by externals that we really aren't being much aware of what's going on in our own lives. And at the end of the day, I mean, you can spend 2 to 3 to 4 hours on Facebook, but at the end of the day, how much more better is it making your life? So that's just one of the things when you talk about your life goals. What are, if you're somebody that's trying to, say, for example, go back to school, and then setting and you're setting that goal up in your head, you want to be kind of aware of the time of the year that it is, how focused you really are. We also want to look at your financial situation. So it's just becoming aware as much as possible to all the factors that could affect your decision. The second part of self-awareness is beliefs. What drives you each and every day are mainly your beliefs. What do you believe about any particular situation? What do you believe about your finances? What do you believe about relationships? What do you believe about health, diet, and exercise? And a lot of times we can always go back to childhood to kind of figure out what or where our beliefs stem from. Because if you want to know what you currently believe, is look at the particular area of your life that you're trying to improve. So if you have a poor financial situation, what are some of your beliefs about money? You can always, like I said, you can always go back to childhood and kind of revisit that idea. It's like, oh, well, my parents, said saving wasn't good and we should always spend because we never know when it'll be our last. And so just using that as an example, we could make it easy as possible for us to kind of shift our beliefs and start moving toward this concept of self-awareness. And then also what ties into beliefs is the values. A lot of our values come from parents, they come from school, they come from close friends and peers, they come from television. We have religious values. That every day we're inundated with other people's values, other people's beliefs, and becoming self-aware of that will kind of put up some type of filter where you'll be, cognitively be able to approach the situation and kind of realize that your values are different than the values that are coming at you, and then you can make the decision to say, okay, well, the values that are coming at me are not aligned with mine, so I'm going to brush those off to the side, or you might want to embrace them. It just all depends on how aware you are of your situation. And then also we can talk about the motivations that drive work performance. Why do you get up in the morning to go to work? Whether you work a 9 to 5 or whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a professor at a prestigious institution, what are some of the motivations that drive work performance? And becoming aware of that will drastically move you along the path of personal growth and development. And then lastly is just conversations within. Each and every day we're having conversations in our head. We can call them a kind of emotional distractors. We're talking or we're thinking about the argument we had last night with our spouse, and although the event itself is still there, the emotional baggage is still there. And so just becoming self-aware as far as the conversation going on within but also kind of help us move towards a path of personal growth and development. And in reference to emotional management, as I mentioned earlier in a couple lectures ago, that the amygdala and the orbital frontal lobe are the two that really deal with emotional management. So, for example, say if your boss angers you, right, and you have an amygdala hijacked, so your amygdala just goes, off the rocker. Depending on how well tuned your frontal lobe is will depend on the action that you take. So it's the amygdala that says, hey, this guy is a threat, we need to do something. But then it's the frontal lobe says, well, no, this is my boss. So it's that communication between the frontal lobe and the amygdala that's very important, that kind of helps us with some of these competencies that you see here, like managing emotions, the drive to achieve, adaptability, and initiative. And then we can also look at self-motivation. Now, research has been done by a gentleman named Richard Davison. Richard Davison had discovered that there were people who had more activity in their right frontal lobe were people who were actually more clinically depressed. So what he was saying is that if a good majority of your activity in the frontal lobe is in the right part of it, you could be clinically depressed. On the flip side, he said those who are on the left side, or who have high activity in the left prefrontal lobe, actually are the complete opposite. They bounce back quicker from adversity. They're always joyful. They're more happier, and they're more peaceful. And then, of course, one of the ways to get this or to get the left prefrontal activation going is actually through meditation. And then it's going to be a quick course on relationships 101. So one of the fourth component of emotional intelligence is relationship management. Like, how can I encourage others? Every day there's such negativity on the news. I mean, Facebook feed, your Twitter feed, Instagram feed. There's always this much of negativity. And it only takes but a second for us to really encourage somebody else and say, hey, you're okay. I feel that something's wrong. I feel that something's going on with you. Let me know if there's something that I can do for you. And just that little 5-second conversation there can actually lift somebody's days up. And then you can also talk about how can I connect with other people. today have tons of different ways that we can connect with people. We can connect them with through social media. We can do live video conferencing, conference calls. We have smartphones and iPads, and all different ways of us with connecting with other people. And although I'm not a big proponent of connecting with people through technology, but that's the world we live in today. But still, even if you can't get to that personal interaction, like one-on-one with somebody, you always want to try and connect with somebody. How can I become a better listener? Listening is actually an active skill that can be developed. It's a matter of just focusing in on when somebody's talking to you. So if you're having a conversation, you shouldn't be in your phone, or you shouldn't be checking your email. You should be, having that eye contact with that person and doing the facial gestures, like nodding your head, showing that you're actually listening and understanding what the person is saying. And then how can you build trust? Is simply by doing the previous 3 things we talked about: encouraging others, connecting with others, and becoming a better listener. And then the most important relationship is the relationship you have with yourself. And that's very key, because I believe that's going to be the foundation from the previous 4. So when we're talking about relationships with ourselves, is what thoughts do we have about ourselves? How well do we take care of ourselves? Are we getting enough rest? Are we getting diet and exercise? Are we focusing on our spiritual life, if that's something that you value? So all these coupled together make up the relationship management part of emotional intelligence. Okay, so that's gonna cover it for lecture number 5. We're moving right along through the lecture. I hope you are getting a lot of value from it. If you have any questions up until this point, please just leave me a message, and I will be sure to respond to you. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into lecture number 6.